The sun over the borderlands of Texas and the Indian Territory in the year of 1875 did not shine so much as it hammered the earth. It was a brutal, indifferent heat that bleached the bones of cattle and turned the red dirt into a fine, choking powder. Here, the wind did not whisper. It scoured. Hawk sat astride his paint gelding on a ridge overlooking the shallow valley that constituted his inheritance. He was a man of two names and no true country. To the census takers and the tax collectors in the settlements, he was Nathan Hawk, the nephew of a deceased white rancher who had been stubborn enough to marry a Comanche woman. To the band that camped near the arroyo during the winter months, he was now Keta, a warrior whose name meant nothing to the white world. He was 25 years of age, though his eyes held the weary antiquity of the limestone rocks beneath his horse's hooves. He wore the trappings of both his bloodlines with a careless disregard for the confusion it caused. His trousers were wool, tucked into high riding boots, but his shirt was buckskin, and his black hair, long and unbound, was kept back by a strip of red cloth. He watched the horizon. A storm was brewing. Not of rain, but of dust. It was a lonely life. The ranch had prospered in a grim, determined way. The cattle were lean but numerous, and the water rights were secure. Yet, when the sun went down and the coyotes began their yipping chorus, the silence in the main house was loud enough to ring in his ears. He needed help. He needed someone to keep the fire burning, to cure the meat, to mend the fences of a domestic life that was slowly crumbling from neglect. But no father in the territory would let his daughter court a man who had ridden with the war parties in his youth, even if that man now held a deed to 3,000 acres. So, he had done the only thing a practical man could do. He had bought a solution. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the letter again. The paper was worn thin from the number of times his rough thumb had traced the ink. To Mr. Nathan Hawk. I answer your advertisement for a wife. I am 22 years old. I have no family. I can cook, wash, and do heavy labor. I do not speak much. I only require a safe place to exchange for my labor. Safe. I will come if you send the ticket. Respectfully, Eliza Monroe. There was no mention of love, no flowery questions about the color of his eyes or the size of his house. Just that one word, repeated twice like a prayer or a desperate plea. Safe. Hawk looked at the handwriting. It was neat, small, and cramped, as if the writer tried to take up as little space in the world as possible. He remembered the day he had sat in the office of Reverend Thomas in the town of Blue Mesa. The Reverend, a man with a face like a dried apple but a heart that pumped genuine kindness, had held the letter with a trembling hand. She assumes you are a white man. Hawk, the Reverend had said, his voice low. The name Nathan, the deed, she does not know. Hawk had leaned back in the chair, his face impassive. I did not lie. Nathan is my name. It is a sin of omission. Son. If she steps off that stagecoach, takes one look at my face, and wishes to return to wherever she came from, I will buy her a return ticket, Hawk had said. I will not keep a woman against her will. I am not a jailer. The Reverend had sighed, dipping his pen in ink to write the reply. Very well. But this town, they will talk. They are already talking about the savage ordering a white bride like a sack of flour. Let them talk, Hawk had said, standing up. Words do not kill. I have seen what kills, and it is not whispers. But as he sat on his horse now, watching the dust swirl, he knew the Reverend was right. The town of Blue Mesa was a festering wound of resentment. The war was over, but the hatred remained. And beyond the town, to the south in the great cities of San Antonio and Austin, the world was changing. The cattle barons were rising. Men like Clayton Marrow, whose names were whispered with fear by the drovers who passed through Hawk's land. It was said Marrow owned more than just land. He owned the law, and he owned the vice that flourished in the post-war chaos. Rumors drifted up the cattle trails of women vanishing into the gilded cages of the city brothels, treated as property, branded like heifers. Hawk shook his head, dispelling the dark thoughts. Today was the day. The stagecoach was due at noon. He turned his horse and began the ride toward town. Blue Mesa was alive with a feverish sort of energy. It was a Saturday, which meant the ranch hands were in for whiskey and cards. But today there was an added attraction. The stagecoach was coming, and with it, the curiosity of the year. When Hawk rode down the main street, the conversation died. It rippled into silence like a stone dropped in a pond. Men stopped mid-sentence, their hands hovering near their holsters, not out of immediate threat, but out of habit. Hawk ignored them. He rode with his back straight, his gaze fixed on the ears of his horse. He tied the gelding at the far end of the station, away from the other horses, and took his place against a support beam. He had wrapped a woolen serape over his shoulders, obscuring his gun belt. He crossed his arms and waited. "Think she knows?" A voice drifted over from the general store porch. It was a cowboy, leaning back in a chair. "Think she knows she is marrying a red Indian? Likely she is some harlot run out of New Orleans," another voice sneered. "No decent woman comes west alone to marry a stranger." Hawk's face remained carved from granite. He had heard worse. He had been called worse by men with more courage than these. The dust cloud appeared first, then the rumble of wheels, and finally, the stagecoach itself, rocking violently as the driver hauled on the reins. The horses lathered and stomped as the vehicle came to a halt in front of the station. The door swung open. A salesman in a checkered suit stepped out first, dusting off his bowler hat, then an older woman with a basket of angry chickens, and then a hand appeared, gripping the frame of the door. The knuckles were white. Eliza Monroe stepped down into the dust of Blue Mesa. She was not what the town expected. She was not the painted woman of their saloons, nor was she the sturdy, wide-hipped farm girl of their imaginations. She was slender, almost fragile, wearing a traveling dress of dark blue wool that had been brushed clean but was faded gray at the seams. It was a dress that had seen many miles and much sorrow. Hawk pushed himself off the beam, but he did not approach. He watched. She stood by her small trunk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her stomach. Her face was pale, possessing a delicate beauty that seemed terrified to show itself. Her hair was pulled back severely, hidden under a plain bonnet, but it was her neck that drew Hawk's sharp eye. Despite the stifling heat of the afternoon, she wore a scarf wrapped high and tight around her throat. She looked like a rabbit that had been dropped into a den of wolves. She scanned the crowd. Her eyes were wide, searching. She was looking for a white man. She was looking for a savior named Nathan. The Reverend Thomas stepped forward from the crowd, clearing his throat. "Miss Monroe." Eliza flinched, turning toward the voice. "Yes, I am Eliza Monroe." Her voice was a rasp, dry and low. "I am Reverend Thomas. I corresponded with you." The old man gestured gently with his hand. "And this is the man you have come to marry. This is Mr. Hawk." The Reverend pointed. The crowd held its breath. They wanted the scream. They wanted the faint. They wanted the confirmation that the savage had tricked a white woman. Eliza turned. Her gaze traveled across the dusty gap between them and landed on Hawk. He held her gaze. He did not smile. He simply nodded, a slow, acknowledging dip of his chin. He let the blanket fall slightly open, showing the buckskin, showing the truth of who he was. She blinked. For a moment, there was confusion. She looked at his high cheekbones, the copper tint of his skin, the dark, unyielding eyes, but there was no revulsion. There was no horror. It was as if she was cataloging him. Man, strong, quiet. But then, her gaze drifted past him. It happened in the space of a heartbeat. As she looked over Hawk's shoulder, scanning the faces of the men gathered on the saloon porch behind him, her face went from pale to the color of old ashes. Her pupils dilated until her eyes were black pits of terror. Her breathing hitched so violently that her chest heaved against the blue wool. Hawk did not turn, but his senses expanded. He felt the shift in the air. She was not looking at him. She was looking at someone behind him. On the porch of the Lucky Strike saloon, a man was leaning against the railing. He wore a low-slung gun belt and a hat pulled low. He was chewing on a toothpick. He was Tom Riker. a hired gun who had drifted into town a month ago, rumored to be waiting for work from the cattle barons in the south. Riker had been watching the spectacle with boredom, but as Eliza's eyes locked onto him, he stopped chewing. He frowned, squinting through the sunlight. He took a step forward, the spurs on his boots chiming softly. "Well now," Riker muttered, loud enough for the silence to carry it. "I know that face." Eliza took a step back, stumbling against her trunk. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching the scarf as if it were armor. She looked ready to bolt, to run into the open desert until her heart burst. Hawk moved. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He did not run, but he moved with a predator's fluidity that placed him directly between Eliza and the porch of the saloon. He blocked her line of sight. He became a wall. "Miss Monroe," Hawk said. His voice was deep, carrying the cadence of the earth. "The wagon is this way." Eliza looked up at him. Up close, he saw the tremors in her hands. He saw that the blue of her eyes was fractured, like ice that had been hammered. She looked at him, and for the first time, she really saw him. She saw a man who was not looking at her legs or her chest. She saw a man who had just placed his body between her and the thing she feared. "Mr. Hawk," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "We are leaving." "Wait," the salesman in the checkered suit called out, sensing the drama was ending too quickly. "She hasn't even said yes. You can't just take her off. Boy, look at her. She is terrified." Hawk ignored the man. He reached down and picked up her trunk with one hand, swinging it onto his shoulder as if it contained nothing but feathers. He looked at Eliza. "If you wish to stay," Hawk said, his voice low, only for her, "I will give the Reverend money for your room and your ticket. You do not have to come with me." Eliza looked past his arm, catching a glimpse of the saloon porch again. Riker was still there, watching, his eyes narrowing as he tried to place exactly where he had seen her before. The recognition was dawning on him, slow and dangerous. She looked back at Hawk, with the knife in his belt, at the scars on his hands, at the stoic, unreadable face that promised absolutely nothing but solitude. "Take me away," she breathed, the words tumbling out. "Please, just take me away from here." Hawk nodded. He turned and led the way to the wagon. The town buzzed with disappointment and confusion. They had expected a scene about race. Instead, they had witnessed something they could not quite decipher. As Hawk loaded the trunk into the back of the buckboard, Eliza climbed onto the seat. She did not wait for his help. She pulled her skirts in tight, making herself small. As Hawk climbed up beside her and took the reins, he felt her trembling. It vibrated through the wooden seat. He slapped the reins. "Hiya!" The horses surged forward. The wagon rattled out of Blue Mesa, leaving the staring faces and the whispering men behind. Riker stood on the porch, watching the dust settle. He took the toothpick out of his mouth and spat. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Rose," he whispered to himself. "Well, I will be damned. The boss is going to want to hear about this." The journey to the ranch took 4 hours. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of hooves, the creak of the leather harness, and the wind hissing through the mesquite. Eliza sat rigid, her spine not touching the back of the seat. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, but Hawk knew she was not seeing the landscape. She was seeing ghosts. Every time the wagon hit a rut, she gasped, her hands clenching into fists. Hawk watched the land. He checked the ridgelines for movement, his habits as a warrior never fully sleeping. But his mind was on the woman beside him. He had expected a desperate spinster. He had expected a widow looking for a meal ticket. He had not expected this, a creature so tightly wound that she looked likely to shatter if the wind changed direction. And he had seen the look in her eyes back in town. That was not the fear of a stranger. That was the fear of a prey animal that hears the snap of a twig. "It is not far now," Hawk said, breaking the silence. Eliza jumped, her head snapping toward him. She blinked, pulling herself back to the present. "Yes, thank you." "You are hungry." No, the answer was too quick. I can wait. I can work first. Hawk frowned. There is no work today. Today we arrived. We eat, we sleep. At the word sleep, she flinched. Her hand went to her throat again. Checking the scarf, "Mr. Hawk," she said, staring straight ahead. "That man in town, the one with the hat." "I saw him," Hawk said. "Do you know him?" "No. He is new. A gun for hire." She swallowed hard. He is a bad man. Most men in town are bad men, one way or another," Hawk said. "Out here, on the ranch, the air's cleaner." She looked at him then, a sideways glance. "You are not what I expected. The Reverend told you I was white." "No," she said softly. "I mean, you did not look at me like I was a horse to be bought." Hawk kept his eyes on the trail. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, purple shadows across the scrub brush. "I need a partner. Miss Monroe, not a horse. I have plenty of horses." "I am a hard worker," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I wrote you the truth. I can cook. I can wash. I am strong." "Good. And I meant what I said about safety." Hawk pulled on the reins, slowing the horses as they crested the final rise. Below them, nestled in a pocket of green near the creek, lay the ranch house. It was modest, built of rough-hewn logs and stone, with a sturdy barn and a corral. Smoke curled from the chimney. To the west, about half a mile away, the conical shapes of 3 teepees stood against the darkening sky, his mother's kin, staying for the season to hunt. "That is the house," Hawk said. He pointed with his chin. "And those are my people. They come and go. They will not bother you." Eliza looked down at the isolated homestead. It was miles from anywhere. If a scream rang out here, the only things to hear it would be the stars. For most women, that would be a terrifying thought. Hawk watched her face, waiting for the panic. Instead, her shoulders dropped an inch. She let out a long, shuddering breath. She looked at the vast emptiness surrounding the house, the lack of streets, the lack of saloons, the lack of men in dark suits. "It is open," she whispered. "It is mine," Hawk said. "And if you stay, it is yours." She turned to him. Her face was still pale, and the shadows under her eyes were deep, but the terror had receded, replaced by a grim determination. She looked at the knife at his waist, then up to his dark eyes. "I will stay, Mr. Hawk," she said. "I will earn my keep." Hawk nodded. He flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled down the slope toward the house. He did not know what she was running from, but he knew the look of a survivor. He had seen it in the mirror enough times. And as they rolled into the yard, Hawk felt a strange new weight settle on his shoulders. It was not the burden of labor or the burden of heritage. It was the burden of a protector. Back in Blue Mesa, the telegraph key clicked in the office of the station master. Tom Riker had paid $3 a fortune for a telegram to send a message to a private office in San Antonio. The message was short. "Found the bird. She is with a Comanche near the border. Send instructions." The sun vanished behind the hills, plunging the world into twilight. The wind picked up, whistling through the eaves of the ranch house, sounding like a warning. But inside, for the first time in years, a lamp was lit by a hand other than Hawk's. The game had begun. The final stretch of the journey was marked by a silence that felt heavier than the heat of the day. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. But Eliza did not seem to notice the beauty of it. She sat on the wooden bench of the wagon as if her spine were fused into a single, unbending rod. Hawk tried to bridge the gap between them. He pointed out a herd of buffalo grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the fading light. "Buffalo," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "They move north this time of year." Eliza turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. "Yes." He tried again a mile later when a hawk circled above them, screeching its lonely cry. "Redtail. Good omen." "Yes." She offered nothing else. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon line, unblinking. Every so often, the wind would carry the faint crack of a rifle shot from miles away hunters, perhaps, or soldiers on patrol, and each time, Eliza's shoulder would jerk. It was a small, involuntary spasm, like a horse flinching from a fly. But Hawk saw it. He saw the way her hands, folded in her lap, would whiten at the knuckles until the sound faded. They arrived at the ranch as the first stars were pricking the velvet sky. It was a modest spread, built more for function than comfort. The main house was a single-story structure of logs and rough-cut stone, sturdy enough to withstand a blizzard or a siege. A corral stood to the side, holding 3 other horses, and beyond that, a few grass huts used for storage. Farther out, near the curve of the creek, the conical silhouettes of 3 teepees rose from the earth. Smoke drifted lazily from their peaks. "It is not much," Hawk said as he pulled the horses to a halt. He gestured with a sweep of his hand that encompassed the house, the land, and the sky above it. "But it is ours." Eliza froze. She looked at him, her eyes wide and startled in the gloom. "Ours?" "You are my wife," Hawk said simply. "What is mine is yours." She looked away quickly, focusing on her boots. The words seemed to unsettle her more than the silence had. She climbed down from the wagon before he could offer a hand, moving with a stiff, efficient energy. Inside, the house was clean but sparse. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A heavy wooden table stood in the center, and 2 doors led to the sleeping quarters. Hawk lit a kerosene lamp, the golden light chasing the shadows into the corners. He watched as Eliza took in the room. She did not look at the hearth or the sturdy roof. She looked at the windows. She checked the thickness of the door. She noted the heavy iron bolt. "I will make supper," she said. It was not an offer. It was a statement of duty. She found the cornmeal and the dried beef with surprising speed, moving around the strange kitchen as if she were a soldier setting up camp. The meal was simple, eaten in the flickering light of the lamp. Hawk ate quietly, watching her. She ate quickly, her eyes darting to the dark windows every few minutes. When the plates were cleared, Eliza stood at the end of the table. She smoothed her faded blue dress and looked him directly in the eye. Her chin was raised, a gesture of defiance that looked practiced. "Mr. Hawk," she began, her voice steady but thin. "We should speak plainly." Hawk nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Speak. I am here to work," she said. "I will cook your meals. I will wash your clothes. I will tend the garden and mend the fences. I will see that you have a warm house in the winter. I earn my keep." "I expect that," Hawk said. "And," she continued, her voice dropping a fraction, "I require a room of my own, with a lock." Hawk felt a flicker of surprise, but kept his face impassive. "I do not wish for you to enter my room unless I give you permission," she said. The words were coming faster now, rehearsed. "And I do not owe you duties of a wife in the bed. If that is the marriage you bought, tell me now, and I will walk to the next town and find work as a laundress." The silence that followed was thick. Hawk looked at this woman, this fragile creature who looked as if a strong wind would blow her away, standing there dictating terms like a treaty negotiator. He felt a sting of hurt. He was a man, after all, and he had hoped, in some small corner of his heart, for softness. But beneath the hurt, he saw the truth. She was terrified. Her hands were trembling at her sides. Her pupils were dilated. She was waiting for him to strike her. She was waiting for the anger that she believed was the natural right of any man denied what he paid for. "Eliza," Hawk said softly. She flinched at her name. "I did not buy you," he said. "You are not a horse. You are not a cow." He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. "There is a room in the back. It has a strong door. You may have it. I will sleep in the main room or the barn until you are ready. If you are never ready, then you are never ready." She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. She had prepared for a fight. She had prepared for violence. She had not prepared for this. "I thank you," she whispered. "You are safe here," Hawk said. "That is the only contract we have." That night, the wind picked up. It howled around the eaves of the ranch house, rattling the loose shingles. Hawk lay on a pallet of buffalo robes in the main room, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Eliza in the back room. She was not sleeping. He heard the creak of the floorboards as she paced. Around midnight, a loose shutter on the barn banged against the wood with a loud thud. From the back room, there was a gasp, sharp and terrified. Then the sound of feet hitting the floor. Hawk sat up. He moved silently to the door of her room. He could hear her breathing short, ragged gasps, like an animal caught in a trap. He heard the metallic scrape of something sharp against wood. She had a knife. He knew it as surely as he knew the smell of rain. She was huddled in there, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for the door to burst open. He did not try the handle. He did not speak her name. Instead, he walked heavily back to the fireplace, letting his boots thud against the floorboards. Thump, thump, thump! He poked the fire noisily with an iron rod. He coughed. "Just the wind," he said, his voice pitching loud enough to carry through the door, but calm. "Old shutter. No one is here. No one touches you." The breathing on the other side of the door hitched, then slowly quieted. He waited until he heard the creak of the bed frame again before he lay back down. He slept with one hand on his revolver, not for fear of intruders, but for the strange, fierce need to guard the woman who was terrified of him. 3 days passed. They fell into a routine that was polite but distant. Eliza worked with a frantic energy, scrubbing floors that were already clean, weeding a garden that had not yet been planted. She spoke only when necessary. She never smiled. Then came the afternoon of the stampede. It was hot, the air thick with dust. Hawk was repairing a bridle on the porch while Eliza washed sheets in a tub in the yard. In the corral, the 3 horses were dozing. Suddenly, from the rocky ridge above the ranch, a mountain lion screamed. It was a blood-curdling sound, like a woman in agony. The horses in the corral panicked. They reared and kicked, their hooves smashing against the wooden rails with the sound of thunder. One of them, a young Mustang, slammed its body against the gate, splintering the wood. The noise was deafening the scream of the cat, the splintering of timber, the frantic whinnying of the horses. Hawk dropped the bridle and ran toward the corral, but Eliza did not run toward safety. At the sound of the crashing wood and the chaotic noise, she dropped the wet sheet into the dirt. Her eyes went blank. It was as if a curtain had been dropped behind her irises. She let out a low, keen sound and bolted. She did not run toward the house. She ran toward the open scrubland, her bare feet kicking up dust. She was running blindly, scrambling over rocks, tearing through the mesquite bushes. "Eliza!" Hawk shouted. She did not hear him. She was not in Texas anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere loud and violent. Hawk abandoned the horses. He sprinted after her. She was fast, fueled by pure adrenaline. But he was a hunter. He caught up to her near a cluster of limestone boulders about a quarter mile from the house. She had tripped and fallen, scraping her knees, but she was scrambling backward, kicking at the air, slashing at invisible hands. "No, no!" she screamed, her voice raw. "I won't go back. You can't make me. Eliza, it is a hawk." He reached her, dropping to his knees. He tried to cover her, to shield her from whatever phantom was attacking her. He pulled the buffalo hide blanket he had grabbed from the porch around her shoulders. She fought him. She was wild, striking out with her fists. Get off me." "Eliza, stop, look at me." Hawk caught her wrists. He did not squeeze, but he held them firm. She went still, her chest heaving. She stared at him, but she was looking through him. Then, slowly, the recognition seeped back in. The terror remained, but the hallucination faded. She slumped against the rock, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The blanket Hawk had thrown over her had slipped. Her sleeve, wet from the laundry and torn by the mesquite, had been pushed up to her shoulder. Her skirt was hiked up to her knees, and Hawk saw, for the first time, he truly saw. Her shins were a map of old pain. There were thin white lines of scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing the pale skin. There were round, puckered marks that looked like burns from a cigar, but it was her arm that made his stomach turn to ice. On the soft skin of her inner arm, there were deeper scars, Some were straight cuts, others were jagged. They were not accidents. They were marks of ownership. They were the tally marks of cruelty. Eliza saw him looking. She froze. A look of utter shame washed over her face, followed instantly by the expectation of disgust. She tried to yank her arm away, to pull the torn fabric down. She curled into a ball, hiding her legs, hiding the evidence of her survival. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm ugly. I'm sorry." She waited for him to recoil. She waited for him to ask what she had done to deserve such marks. Hawk did not move away. He did not ask. He felt a rage burn in his gut, hot and sudden. A warrior's rage that wanted to find the men who had done this and peel the skin from their bones. But he pushed it down. He pushed it deep into the earth where it could not burn her. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before gently, reverently, pulling the buffalo robe back up to cover her shoulder. He tucked the edges around her feet, shielding her scars from the sun and from his own eyes. "You are not ugly," Hawk said. His voice was a low rumble, steady as the ground beneath them. "You are alive." He sat back on his heels, giving her space. He did not try to touch her again. "The horses," he said, changing the subject to something simple, something real. "A mountain lion scared them. That was the noise. Just horses." Eliza peeked out from the blanket. Her eyes were red-rimmed, searching his face for the lie. She found none. "Just horses," she whispered. "Just horses. The cat is gone." She nodded, swallowing hard. She looked at her arm, hidden under the fur. "You saw." "I saw," Hawk acknowledged. "And it changes nothing. You are safe here." He stood up and offered her a hand. He did not demand she take it. He simply left it there, a brown, calloused palm open to the sky. Eliza looked at his hand. It was a hand that could kill. She knew that, but it was also the hand that had just covered her shame instead of exposing it. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out. Her fingers were cold. She gripped his hand, and he pulled her to her feet. She was unsteady, so he shifted his stance, allowing her to lean against him without putting his arm around her. He became a crutch, not a cage. They walked back to the house in silence. Something had shifted. The air between them was no longer filled with the polite fiction of a housekeeper and a rancher. The contract had changed. Hawk looked at the horizon where the town of Blue Mesa lay hidden. He thought of the man in the checkered suit. He thought of the gunman, Riker. He thought of the fear that had sent Eliza running into the rocks at the sound of breaking wood. She was not just a woman looking for a home. She was a fugitive. And whoever had put those marks on her considered her property. Property was always reclaimed. Hawk's jaw tightened. He was done looking for a wife to cook his meals. As they reached the porch, Eliza stopped. She pulled her hand from his, but she did not step away immediately. "Hawk," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without the title. "Yes, thank you. Go inside," he said. "Rest. I will fix the corral." He watched her go into the house and heard the heavy bolt slide into place. It was the sound of her fear. Yes, but it was also the sound of her taking control of her space. Hawk turned and walked toward the barn. He did not go to the tools. Instead, he went to the hidden compartment under the floorboards where he kept the weapons he did not carry every day. He pulled out a Winchester rifle. He sat on a hay bale and began to clean it, the smell of oil and metal filling the air. He would find out who the man in town was. He would find out what Eliza was running from, and if the past came riding up that trail to drag her back, it would find a Comanche warrior standing in the gate. Inside the house, Eliza sat on the edge of her bed. Her hands were shaking less now. She touched the spot on her arm where the blanket had rested. He had seen the ruin of her, the map of her degradation, and he had not looked at her with pity or disgust. He had looked at her with respect. For the first time in years, a dangerous, terrifying feeling bloomed in her chest. It was not safe. It was hope. And to Eliza Monroe, hope was the most dangerous thing in the world. The weeks that followed the incident with the mountain lion were a time of silent reconstruction. The ranch, once merely a structure of wood and stone sitting isolated on the plains, began to transform. To the casual observer, it remained a working cattle operation, but to Hawk, it was becoming a fortress. He did not build high walls or dig moats. Instead, he built a map of safety in Eliza Munro's mind. Each morning, before the sun was high enough to burn, Hawk saddled 2 horses. He lifted Eliza onto the mare, a gentle roan he had traded for the previous winter. At first, she sat rigid, her hands gripping the pommel until her knuckles were white, terrified of the animal's power. But Hawk was patient. He rode beside her, not speaking, letting the rhythm of the gait settle into her bones. "You must know the land," Hawk told her one morning as they reached a ridge overlooking a dry creek bed. "If the bluecoats come, or if bad men come, the house is a trap. The land is the escape." He guided her down into the arroyo. It was a hidden world of red earth and twisted mesquite roots. "This wash leads 5 miles north to the limestone caves," he explained, pointing to the jagged cracks in the distant canyon wall. "My mother's people used these trails when the Texas Rangers rode against us. A horse cannot be seen from the ridge. If you are in here, you are a ghost." Eliza listened, her eyes memorizing every turn, every rock formation. For the first time in her life, someone was not telling her where she was confined. He was showing her how to disappear. "And there," Hawk said, pointing to a dense thicket of briars near the water source. "A man on a horse will not ride through that. He will go around, but on foot. There is a tunnel through the center. It is small, but you fit." Eliza looked at the thorns, then at Hawk. "You want me to run? I want you to have the choice," Hawk said. "Freedom is not just open doors, Eliza. It is knowing which door leads to life." The lessons continued, but the hardest lesson was the iron. One afternoon, Hawk placed a Colt Navy revolver on the wooden rail of the corral. The metal glinted in the harsh sunlight, cold and indifferent. He set up 3 empty tin cans on a fence post 20 yards away. "Pick it up," Hawk said. Eliza stared at the gun, her breath hitched in her throat. Suddenly, the smell of the dusty corral vanished, replaced by the scent of stale tobacco and cheap perfume. She heard the deafening roar of a gunshot in a small room. She saw a girl named Sarah falling, a red bloom spreading across her white shift, while a man laughed and blew smoke from the barrel. "I cannot," Eliza whispered, stepping back. Her hands shook violently. "I hate them. Please." Hawk did not mock her. He did not force the weapon into her hand. He stepped behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, but he did not touch her. "The gun is just a tool," he said, his voice low and steady near her ear. "Like a hoe, like a needle. It has no soul. It has no malice. Evil is in the hand that holds it." "My hands are weak," she stammered. "Your hands have scrubbed floors until they bled," Hawk countered. "Your hands have carried water and chopped wood. They are not weak." He reached out and covered her trembling right hand with his own. Slowly, he guided her hand to the grip of the revolver. The weight of it shocked her. It felt heavy, substantial. "Breathe," Hawk commanded. "Do not look at the gun. Look at the can." Eliza tried to focus, her vision blurred with tears. The memory of the violence she had witnessed threatened to overwhelm her, but the steady warmth of Hawk's hand anchoring hers kept her in the present. "Pull the hammer back," he instructed. She struggled with the mechanism. It was stiff. Hawk's thumb pressed over hers, adding the necessary strength. "Click. Now," Hawk said, stepping back, leaving her standing alone with the weapon. "The power is yours, Eliza, not the man's. Yours. Send the fear into the tin can." She squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them. She aimed. The barrel wavered. She gritted her teeth, channeling every ounce of rage she had swallowed for 2 years into her index finger. She pulled the trigger. The explosion kicked her arm back, shocking her shoulder. The bullet went wide, kicking up dirt 3 feet to the left of the fence, but the can did not matter. Eliza stood there, the smoke drifting around her, the ringing in her ears drowning out the ghosts. She was still standing. The gun had not turned on her. "Again," Hawk said. She fired until the cylinder was empty. She did not hit a single can that day, but when she lowered the weapon, her spine was straighter. She looked at Hawk, and for the first time, a faint, tentative smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of joy, but of relief. "I missed," she said. "You fired," Hawk corrected. "That is the victory." That evening, by the fire, Hawk spoke of his past. It was a rare offering. He usually guarded his history as fiercely as he guarded the ranch, but he sensed Eliza's hunger for understanding. She needed to know that survival was possible, that a person could be broken and still be whole. "When I was a boy," Hawk said, carving a piece of ash wood into a new handle for an axe. "My name was Now Keta. It means little hunter. We did not live in houses. We followed the buffalo. My mother taught me that the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth." Eliza sat mending a shirt, the needle flashing in the firelight. Was it frightening sleeping outside? "No," Hawk said. "Walls are frightening. In the teepee, you hear the wind. You hear the horses. You know what is coming. Here," he tapped the log wall. "Here, you are blind." He told her of the Comanche women, how they rode with the skill of warriors, how they butchered the meat and tanned the hides, how they owned everything inside the lodge. They were not silent shadows. They laughed loudly. They gambled with stick games. They divorced husbands who did not please them by simply putting the man's belongings outside the entrance. Eliza stopped sewing. The needle hovered in the air. "They could just put his things outside." "Yes," Hawk said. "A woman is not property among the people. She is the center of the family. If she is unhappy, the family breaks." Eliza stared into the fire. "In San Antonio, in the place I was, the doors were locked from the outside. The windows were painted shut so we could not see the street." It was the first time she had offered a specific detail of her confinement. "That is not a home," Hawk said, his voice hardening. "That is a cage for animals." "I thought all the world was like that," she whispered. "Those men held the keys, and women waited to be opened." Hawk looked at her across the flames. The firelight danced on his high cheekbones, casting deep shadows. "Not here," he said. "Here, you hold your own keys." The fragility of their peace was tested 3 days later. Eliza had grown bolder. She had taken to exploring the rocky outcroppings near the creek on her own, searching for the wild onions Hawk had described. She was climbing a limestone shelf, her boots seeking purchase on the damp stone, when a ledge crumbled beneath her weight. She cried out as she fell, sliding 10 feet down the rough face of the rock before landing hard in the shallow water of the creek. The pain was immediate and sharp. Her skirt had snagged on a jagged root, tearing loudly, and her left knee struck a submerged stone. Hawk was there within moments. He had been repairing a fence line nearby and heard the slide of shale. He splashed into the water, his face pale with concern. "Eliza!" He reached her as she was trying to stand, water dripping from her hem. "I am fine," she gasped, wincing as her leg buckled. "I just slipped. I was clumsy." "Sit," Hawk commanded gently. He scooped her up into his arms. She was light, terrifyingly light, like a bird made of hollow bones. She stiffened instinctively at the contact, her hands pushing against his chest, but he held her only securely enough to carry her, making no move to pull her closer than necessary. He carried her to the bank and set her down on a flat, sun-warmed rock. Her dress was soaked and muddy, the heavy fabric clinging to her legs. The tear in the skirt was long, exposing her undergarments and her left leg from the knee down. Blood was welling up from a nasty scrape on her shin, mixing with the creek water. "I need to clean it," Hawk said. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and dipped it in the clear running water. "I can do it," Eliza said, reaching down, trying to pull the torn fabric together to hide her skin. "Please, it is nothing." "Eliza," Hawk said, "let me help." He gently moved her hands aside. He peeled back the wet, ruined wool of her skirt to expose the wound. And then he stopped. The handkerchief in his hand hovered in midair. The fresh scrape from the rock was bleeding, red and angry, but it was not the scrape that stopped Hawk's heart. Around the new wound, on the pale skin of her thigh and calf, were the ghosts of old violence. There were long, thin white lines that looked like the marks of a riding crop. There were circular scars, darker than the rest, clustered on her inner thigh, and higher up, near where the hem of her undergarments began, was a small, cruel letter M burned faintly into the flesh, now distorted by time but still legible to a man who knew how cattle were marked. He had seen her fear. He had seen her flinch. But now, looking at the map of torture etched onto her skin, he understood the magnitude of her survival. She had not just been used. She had been claimed, marked, and broken methodically. Eliza was shaking. She was not looking at her leg. She was looking at his face, waiting for the revulsion. She expected him to see her as damaged goods, as something spoiled and shameful. Hawk did not look away. He did not recoil. Slowly, he lowered the wet cloth and began to clean the fresh blood, his touch as light as a feather. He washed the mud away from the old scars with the same reverence he used to clean the ceremonial pipes of his uncle. When he looked up, his eyes were swimming with a profound, aching sorrow. There was no lust in his gaze. There was no judgment. There was only a fierce, protective grief. "Who did this?" Hawk asked. His voice was a rumble of thunder, distant but dangerous. Eliza looked at him, stunned by the tenderness in his hands. She saw the rage in his eyes, but she knew, with a sudden, blinding clarity, that the rage was not directed at her. "Men," she whispered. "Men in San Antonio, at the Gilded Cage." "The brand?" Hawk asked, his eyes flickering to the M. "Marrow," she choked out. "Clayton Marrow. He owns the place. He owns everything." Hawk's jaw tightened until the muscle leaped. Marrow. The rumor was flesh and blood. The cattle baron who thought he was a king. "He does not own you," Hawk said. He finished cleaning the wound and tore a strip from his own shirt to bind it. "Not anymore." "They called me Rose," Eliza confessed, the words spilling out now that the dam had broken. He said Eliza was a boring name for a boring girl. "He made me answer to Rose. If I did not answer—" She looked at the scars on her legs. "He taught me to answer." Hawk finished the knot. He sat back, his hands resting on his knees. He looked at the water flowing over the rocks, clear and unceasing. "My knife is sharp," Hawk said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "I could ride to San Antonio. I could find this Marrow. I could cut the M from his skin." Eliza reached out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "No. He has 100 men. He has the law. You would die, and I would be alone again." Hawk looked down at her hand on his wrist. The warrior in him screamed for blood. The Comanche way demanded retribution for an insult to the family. But the man who wanted a future looked at the terrified woman begging him to stay alive. He took a breath, forcing the red haze of war to recede. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. "I will not go," he promised. "But if he comes here, Eliza, if he comes here, I will not be a rancher. Do you understand?" "I understand," she said. After that day, the air between them changed. The awkwardness of strangers dissolved, replaced by a charged awareness. They worked side by side. Hawk repaired the roof of the barn while Eliza tended the vegetable garden below. She would pause, wiping sweat from her brow, and watch him. She watched the way the muscles in his back moved under his skin when he swung the hammer. He had taken his shirt off in the heat, his copper skin gleaming with sweat. In the past, the sight of a half-naked man would have sent her into a panic. But this was Hawk. This was the man who had washed her scars and bound them with his own clothes. She found herself staring not with fear, but with a strange, fluttering sensation in her stomach. It was a heat that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. One afternoon, 2 children from the Comanche encampment wandered near the house. They were curious about the white woman. Eliza, instead of hiding, brought out a slate and chalk. She sat on the porch steps and began to draw letters. She said. "Apple." The children mimicked her, giggling. Hawk watched from the corral. Leaning on a post, he saw Eliza smile, a genuine, bright smile that transformed her face. taking 10 years of sorrow off her features. She looked up and caught him watching. The smile faltered for a second, then returned, softer, more intimate. Hawk felt a pull in his chest that scared him more than any cavalry charge. He wanted to walk up the steps, take her face in his hands, and kiss the dust from her cheek. But he stayed where he was. He would wait. She had to be the one to cross the final distance. But the world outside the ranch would not leave them in peace. Supplies were running low. They needed flour, salt, and ammunition. The trip to Blue Mesa was unavoidable. "We go together," Hawk said. "Head high." The town was busy on a Saturday. When Hawk's wagon rolled in, with Eliza sitting beside him in a new dress she had sewn from calico, the street went quiet. They walked into the general store. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, a stark contrast to the heavy silence of the customers. A woman in a bonnet, the wife of the blacksmith, pulled her skirts away as Eliza passed. "Shameless," the woman whispered to her neighbor. "Living in sin with a savage, a harlot and a heathen." Eliza froze. Her face burned. The old shame, the conditioned response to keep her head down and accept the insult, washed over her. She started to pull away from Hawk, to shrink into the background. Hawk did not let her go. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlaced with hers, warm and calloused. He squeezed firmly, an anchor in the storm. He turned his head and looked directly at the blacksmith's wife. His gaze was flat, hard, and utterly unashamed. "Mrs. Gable," Hawk said, his voice carrying through the silent store. "Good afternoon," the woman sputtered, turning red, and hurried away to the back of the store. Eliza looked up at Hawk. He was not looking at the floor. He was not looking for a fight. He was simply standing his ground. By holding her hand, he was forcing the town to acknowledge her not as a harlot, but as his partner. She squeezed his hand back. For the first time, she walked through the store with her head up, but they were being watched. Across the street, under the shade of the saloon awning, Tom Riker leaned against a post. He was whittling a piece of wood. His eyes narrowed under the brim of his hat. He watched the couple exit the store. He watched Hawk help Eliza into the wagon. As Eliza reached up to adjust her bonnet, the scarf she always wore slipped down just an inch. Riker saw it, a thin, jagged white line on the side of her neck, a scar from a knife, given to a girl named Rose who had tried to bite a customer 2 years ago. Riker smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. He snapped the knife shut and walked toward the telegraph office. 10 minutes later, the telegraph key began to click, sending a message across the wires. South to San Antonio, to Clayton Merrow. Found Rose. She is playing house with a Comanche breed named Hawk near Blue Mesa. She looks healthy, awaiting orders. As Hawk and Eliza rode out of town, the sun was setting, painting the sky in blood red. Eliza rested her head briefly on Hawk's shoulder, exhausted but feeling a strange new peace. She did not know that the wires behind them were already humming with her doom. The sanctuary had been breached. The past had found its address. The rumors arrived before the men did, carried on the dust-clotted wind like seeds of a poisonous weed. It started with the drovers passing through, men with sun-cracked faces and loose tongues who stopped at the creek to water their herds. They spoke of a bounty. Clayton Merrow, the king of the southern feedlots, was offering $500 for information regarding a thief who had stolen a substantial sum of money and fled north. The thief, the posters claimed, was a woman. The town of Blue Mesa, already suspicious, began to curdle. The whispers that had once been merely cruel now turned dangerous. Hawk saw it in the way the blacksmith turned his back when he rode past. He saw it in the way the shopkeeper hesitated before selling him flour. They no longer saw a man and his wife. They saw a savage harboring a criminal. Reverend Thomas tried to stem the tide. He stood on the steps of his small church on Sunday, his voice trembling with righteous indignation. "Judge not, lest ye be judged," he thundered. "Gossip is the devil's radio." But his congregation looked at their boots and muttered. $500 was a lot of money in a land where a good horse cost 20. Hawk knew time was running out. He began to prepare for war. Not the open warfare of the plains, but a defensive war of shadows. He rode out to the encampment of his mother's people, 3 miles west of the ranch house. He sat by the fire of his uncle. 10 bears, an elder whose face was a roadmap of Comanche history. They spoke in the old tongue, the words low and guttural. "The white wolf comes," Hawk said, using the name his people had for the lawmen who hunted with paper and chains. "They come for the woman." 10 bears smoked his pipe, the smoke curling into the night air. "Is she yours?" "Now, Keta." "She is mine," Hawk answered without hesitation. "Not as property, as a breath." 10 bears nodded slowly. "Then we will watch. If the bluecoats come, we vanish. But if it is only bad men, the land has many holes to swallow them." Back at the ranch, Hawk worked with a frantic, silent energy. He stocked the root cellar with dried meat, water barrels, and ammunition. He showed Eliza the hidden cache of weapons under the floorboards of the barn. He taught her a new signal, the call of a meadowlark. 3 short trills. "If you hear this," he told her, gripping her shoulders, "you run to the creek. You do not look back. You go to the cave and you wait." Eliza nodded, her face pale but set. She practiced the run until her lungs burned. She cleaned the Colt Navy until the metal gleamed. She was terrified, yes, but beneath the fear, a cold iron resolve was forming. Then came the night of the sandstorm. It hit just after sunset, a wall of red dust that blotted out the stars and turned the world into a screaming void. The wind hammered against the ranch house, shaking the sturdy logs. Sand hissed against the windows like a million tiny vipers. Eliza was in her room. The noise was deafening. To her, it sounded like the roar of a drunken crowd, the smashing of bottles, the heavy boots kicking down a door. The darkness of the room felt suffocating, pressing in on her chest. She retreated to the corner, wedging herself between the heavy wardrobe and the wall. She curled into a ball, her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth. "No," she whispered. "No, please, not again." Hawk was in the main room, pacing. He heard the whimpers over the howling wind. He went to her door and knocked. "Eliza?" No answer, only the sound of ragged breathing. He knocked harder. "Eliza, open the door!" Inside, Eliza screamed. The banging was not Hawk. It was Riker. It was Marrow. It was every man who had ever forced his way into her sanctuary. Hawk did not hesitate. He lifted the latch she had forgotten to slide the bolt in her panic and pushed the door open. The room was pitch black. He struck a match, the sudden flare of light revealing her huddled form in the corner, her eyes wide and unseeing. A knife clutched in her trembling hand. "Get out!" she shrieked, slashing the air. "Get out!" Hawk blew out the match and dropped it. He did not retreat. He moved slowly into the darkness, his voice dropping to a soothing rumble. "It is a hawk. It is only Hawk. The wind is loud, but the house is strong." He knelt before her, out of reach of the knife, but close enough that she could smell the scent of him wood smoke, leather, and rain. "Eliza," he said, "I am not them." She stopped rocking. The knife wavered. She blinked, trying to see him in the gloom. "Hawk, I am here." She let the knife clatter to the floor. A sob broke from her chest, a sound of pure desolation. "I hate the dark," she wept. "I hate the noise. I am so tired of being afraid." Hawk moved then. He did not grab her. He simply opened his arms. With a cry, Eliza threw herself forward. She buried her face in his chest, her hands clutching his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. Hawk wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He felt every tremor in her body, every jagged edge of her trauma. He held her until the sobbing subsided into hiccuping breaths. The storm raged outside, but in the corner of the room, there was a quiet heat. Eliza pulled back slightly, looking up at him. His face was inches from hers, obscured by shadow, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. She realized, with a jolt, that she was not afraid of him. She was in his arms, and for the first time in her life, the proximity of a man did not make her want to flee. It made her want to stay. She reached up, her fingers trembling, and touched his cheek. His skin was warm. Rough stubble grazed her fingertips. "Stay," she whispered. Hawk went still. "Eliza, please," she said. "Do not leave me in the dark." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a tentative, frightened question. Hawk answered it. He kissed her back, gently at first, then with a growing hunger that matched the storm outside. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the narrow bed. He did not pin her down. He lay beside her, his body a shield against the wall. His hands were careful, reverent. He touched her not to take, but to ask. His palm slid over her waist, feeling the scars through the thin cotton of her nightdress. "Tell me to stop," Hawk murmured against her neck. "Say the word, and I'm gone." Eliza felt the panic rise, the old reflex to freeze and endure. But then she felt his heart beating against her chest. She felt his restraint. He was trembling too. She realized he was terrified of hurting her. She took his hand and placed it on her heart. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Hawk, don't stop." It was not a conquest. It was a reclamation. Every touch was a negotiation, every kiss a promise kept. When he entered her, she braced for pain, but found only a fierce, grounding connection. She cried out, not in fear, but in release. For the first time, her body belonged to her, because she had chosen to share it. In the aftermath, as the wind began to die down, they lay tangled in the sheets. Hawk stroked her hair. His other arm draped protectively over her waist. "I lied," Eliza said into the darkness. Her voice was clear now, stripped of its tremors. "About what?" "About the money. I did not steal it. I earned it. $2 a week for 2 years. I sewed it into the hem of my dress." Hawk kissed the top of her head. "I know. My name is not just Eliza," she continued. "It is Eliza Jane Monroe. My father was a drunk in Kansas. He sold my labor to a man who sold me a house in San Antonio." She took a breath and said the names out loud, casting them into the fire of their intimacy. "The house was called the Gilded Cage. The owner is Clayton Merrow. His dog is Tom Riker. They brand the women who try to run. They made me do things." "Hawk." "Hush," Hawk said. "You did what you had to do to survive." "They called me Rose," she whispered, the shame creeping back into her voice. Hawk tightened his grip on her. He pulled her chin up until she was looking at him in the dim light. "Rose is dead," he said fiercely. "She died in the desert. You are Eliza. You are the woman who shoots tin cans. You are the woman who survived the storm. No man will ever call you that name again and live." The next morning, the world was calm, washed clean by the wind. But the peace was broken by a rider approaching the ranch. It was not a gunman. It was the postmaster from Blue Mesa, looking nervous as he handed a letter to Hawk at the gate. "Came for the lady," the man mumbled, eyeing Hawk's rifle before kicking his horse into a gallop back toward town. Eliza took the letter with trembling hands. It was addressed to Miss E. Monroe, care of general delivery, Blue Mesa. It had been forwarded from 3 different towns before finding her. She tore it open. As she read, her eyes widened. "Who is it?" Hawk asked. "A lawyer," she breathed. "A Quaker man in Philadelphia. I wrote to a society for the protection of women before I ran. I thought they would never get it." "What does he say?" He says they are building a case," Eliza said, looking up, her face glowing with disbelief. "He says they are trying to shut down the traffic of women across state lines. He says if I am willing to testify, my words could help free the others." Hawk looked at the paper. It was fragile, like Eliza, but it held the power to topple empires. "This is not just hiding anymore," he said slowly. "This is fighting." But the enemy was moving faster than the mail. 2 days later, a cowboy Hawk knew a young man named Billy, who had once worked for his uncle, rode onto the property. His horse was lathered. "Hawk," Billy shouted. "You gotta get out. They're in Red Butte." Hawk helped Billy down. "Who?" "Merrow. Billy gasped. "He's got 6 men with him, and he's hired the sheriff from Red Butte. They're saying you kidnapped a white woman. They're saying you're holding her against her will and abusing her. They're coming to rescue her, Hawk, and they're bringing a rope." Eliza stood on the porch, her hand on her throat. The blood drained from her face. "When?" Hawk asked. "Tomorrow," Billy said. "Maybe sooner. The whole town is split. Some folks are saying it ain't right, but most are scared of Marrow." Hawk looked at Eliza. Then he looked at the hills where his uncle's people were camped. "Billy," Hawk said, "ride to the Reverend. Tell him to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For a wedding," Hawk said grimly. "Or a funeral. I have not decided yet. That night, the argument in the ranch house was fierce." "I will go to them," Eliza insisted, packing a small bag. "I will walk into town and surrender. I will tell them I stole the money. I will go back." "No," Hawk slammed his hand on the table. "You go back, and you die. Or worse. If I stay, they will kill you," Eliza cried. "They will kill you, and they will kill your people. They will use this as an excuse to wipe out the camp. I cannot let that happen. Hawk, I am not worth it." Hawk grabbed her shoulders and shook her. "You are worth it. Do not say that you are not a thing to be traded for peace." "I am damaged," she screamed, the tears flowing freely. "I am a whore in the eyes of the law. You are a savage. We cannot win." "Then we change the law," Hawk shouted back. "Or we die trying, but we do not kneel." He pulled her close, silencing her protests with a fierce embrace. "Listen to me. If we run, we are guilty. If we hide, we are prey. There is only one way." "What?" she sobbed into his chest. "We go to them," Hawk said. "We go to Blue Mesa. We stand in the light. We bring the Reverend. We bring the letter from the Quaker. We brought my uncle. We make them look at us. We make them say it to our faces in front of witnesses." "They will shoot you," she whispered. "Not if the whole town is watching," Hawk said. "Marrow thrives in the dark. Eliza, just like the men in that house, we drag him into the sun." It was a desperate plan. It was a gambler's throw. But as Eliza looked into his eyes that had seen her wounds and loved her anyway, she knew he was right. They would not run. They would stand. "Okay," she whispered. "Yeah." "We stand," Hawk nodded. He went to the wall and took down his Winchester. He handed Eliza the Colt Navy. "Sleep now," he said. "Tomorrow, we will ride to Blue Mesa. And tomorrow, we will end it." Outside, the wind picked up again, blowing the dust of the impending conflict across the plains. The sanctuary was no longer enough. It was time for the revolution. The sun hung directly overhead. A white-hot coin punched into the hard blue sky. When Clayton Marrow arrived in Blue Mesa, he did not ride in on a dusty gelding like a working man. He arrived in a carriage lacquered black, drawn by 4 matched bays that glistened with health and grain. Flanking the carriage were 6 riders, men with hard eyes and Winchesters resting casually across their saddle horns. The town stopped. The blacksmith let his hammer rest on the anvil. The ladies emerging from the mercantile froze, clutching their parcels. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, sensing a predator that was far more dangerous than a mountain lion. Hawk and Eliza stood on the wooden boardwalk outside the sheriff's office. They had been waiting. Hawk wore his buckskin shirt and his gun belt low on his hips. Eliza stood beside him, not behind him. She wore her blue calico dress, the high collar fastened tight, but her hands were not trembling. They rested at her sides, close to the small bag she carried and close to the Colt Navy tucked into the waistband of her petticoats. The carriage halted in front of them. Dust swirled around the polished wheels. The door opened, and Clayton Marrow stepped out. He was a handsome man in the way a viper is handsome. He wore a suit of fine black broadcloth, a silk vest the color of dried blood, and a wide-brimmed planter's hat. He dusted his lapel with a gloved hand and looked up at the couple on the boardwalk. A slow, oily smile spread across his face. "Rose," Marrow said, his voice smooth and cultured, carrying easily in the silence. "You look different, my dear. A little thinner, perhaps, but still, my property." Hawk stepped forward, placing one boot on the edge of the boardwalk. "Her name is Eliza Monroe." Marrow's eyes flicked to Hawk, dismissing him as one might dismiss a fly. "I do not speak to livestock, sir." "I speak to the owners of livestock?" He reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded document with a red wax seal. He turned to the sheriff, a portly man named Miller who was sweating profusely despite the shade of his porch. "Sheriff Miller," Marrow said, extending the paper. "This is a contract of indenture, signed by this woman in San Antonio 2 years ago. It states clearly that she owes the Gilded Cage establishment the sum of $1,000 for room board and medical expenses. Until that debt is paid, her labor and her person belong to me." Sheriff Miller took the paper with shaking hands. He squinted at the legal script. It looks official. Mr. Marrow, seal of Judge Roy Bean down in Pecos County?" "It is official," Marrow said coldly. "She is a runaway debtor and a thief. I am here to reclaim my investment. Hand her over, Sheriff, and there will be no trouble. Refuse, and I will assume this town is harboring criminals." Tom Riker, sitting on his horse behind the carriage, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. He rested his hand on his pistol. The threat was clear. The sheriff looked at Hawk, then at Marrow's gunman. He swallowed hard. "Now, Hawk, if the paper is legal, the law is the law. You have got to step aside." Hawk did not move. His hand hovered inches from his gun, but it was Eliza who broke the silence. She stepped past Hawk, moving down the stairs until she stood on the dusty street, level with Marrow. She looked small against the carriage and the horses, but her chin was lifted high. "I am not Rose," she said, her voice clear, ringing off the wooden storefronts. "And I am not an investment. I am Eliza Monroe." Marrow chuckled. "A name change does not erase a debt. Darling." "I signed nothing but a paper for a train ticket," Eliza said. "You told me it was a loan for travel to a job as a seamstress. Then you locked me in a room. You beat me when I tried to leave. You sold me to men for $5 an hour and kept the money to pay for the rent of my prison." She reached up and unbuttoned the cuffs of her sleeves. She rolled them up, revealing the jagged silver scars on her forearms to the bright sunlight. She turned her arms so the sheriff, the townspeople, and Marrow could see. "Is this a contract?" she asked, her voice trembling with a fury that was hotter than the sun. "Is this a debt, or is this a cattle brand?" A murmur went through the crowd. The blacksmith's wife covered her mouth. Hawk stepped down to stand beside her. He looked at the crowd, his dark eyes burning. "You call my people savages," Hawk said, his voice deep and resonant. "You say we are wild, that we do not know God, but we do not chain our women. We do not sell them for coins." He pointed a long finger at Marrow. "This man wears silk and speaks English, but he holds a paper that says a human being is a thing to be bought. If you think his signature makes him civilized and my blood makes me a savage, then let the sky fall down and judge us all right now." "Pretty words for a redskin," Marrow sneered. "But the law is written on paper, not on the wind. Sheriff, arrest her." "Hold on." The voice came from the door of the Lucky Strike saloon. A tall man in a dust-coated gray suit stepped out. He had a mane of white hair and carried a book under his arm. It was Judge Sterling, a circuit judge who traveled the territory twice a year. He had arrived only an hour before on the stage. "I believe," Judge Sterling said, walking slowly into the street, "that there is a dispute here regarding the interpretation of the law, and since I am the highest legal authority within 200 miles, I will hear it." Marrow's smile faltered. "Judge Sterling, this is a simple matter of repossession." "Nothing involving a human life is simple, Mr. Marrow," the judge said. "Sheriff, bring the parties into the saloon. It is too hot to discuss jurisprudence in the street. We will hold court." The saloon was cleared of drinkers. Tables were pushed together to form a bench. The judge sat in the center, his book a heavy Bible placed before him. The air smelled of stale beer and tobacco, but the mood was as solemn as a cathedral. The entire town squeezed inside. Cowboys stood on tables to see. Reverend Thomas stood by the piano, his hands clasped in prayer. Marrow stood on the left, flanked by Riker. Hawk and Eliza stood on the right. "Present your evidence," Judge Sterling commanded. Marrow slammed the contract onto the table. "Standard indenture. She owes the house. She ran away with cash box money. She is a fugitive. She is a slave," Hawk countered. "And slavery is dead." "It is debt repayment," Marrow shouted. "She signed it." "Under duress," Eliza said. She looked at the judge. "He held a gun to my head. He said if I did not sign, he would give me to the men in the cellar, the ones who do not pay." The judge looked at her. "Can you prove this abuse?" A voice spoke up from the back. "I can." It was Billy, the young cowboy who had warned them. He stepped forward, taking off his hat. "I was in San Antonio last winter. Judge, I went to the Gilded Cage. I saw this woman. She dropped a glass. Riker there." He pointed at the gunman. Riker backhanded her so hard she flew across the room. Then he dragged her upstairs by her hair. She was screaming for mercy. "That wasn't no employee. Judge." "That was a prisoner." Marrow turned on Billy, his eyes murderous. "You are a lying cattle hand. I swear it on my mother's grave," Billy said steadily. Judge Sterling picked up the contract. He put on his spectacles and read it slowly. The saloon was silent, save for the buzzing of a fly against the window pane. Finally, the judge looked up. He removed his spectacles. "Mr. Marrow," the judge said, "the war between the states ended 10 years ago. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution is quite clear. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States." "This is a debt," Marrow insisted, sweating now. "It is a contract for the ownership of a person's body," the judge corrected, his voice hard as iron. "You cannot enforce a debt by claiming the person as chattel. If she stole money, that is a matter for a criminal court, to be proven with evidence, not a bill of sale. You cannot drag her back to your brothel." The judge stood up. He took the contract in both hands. "This document is repugnant to the law of God and the law of this nation," Judge Sterling announced, with a sharp rip. He tore the paper in half, then in half again. He let the pieces flutter to the floor like dead leaves. "Eliza Monroe is a free woman," the judge declared. "Case dismissed." The room erupted. Reverend Thomas shouted, "Amen." In that instant of chaos, Tom Riker moved. His hand flashed to his holster. "To hell with this," he snarled. "I'm taking her." He drew his revolver, leveling it at Eliza, but Hawk was already moving. He did not draw with the flourish of a duelist. He drew with the fluid, blinding speed of a survivalist. Before Riker's barrel could clear leather, Hawk's Colt was up. Click. The sound of the hammer cocking echoed louder than a gunshot in the sudden silence. Hawk's barrel was pressed directly against Riker's forehead. Riker froze, his own gun half drawn. "Drop it," Hawk whispered. The sound was like dry leaves skittering over stone. "Give me a reason, dog. Give me one reason to paint this wall with your thoughts." Riker's eyes went wide. He looked at Marrow for help. Marrow was staring at the muzzle of a shotgun held by the sheriff, who had finally found his courage. Billy and 3 other cowboys had also drawn their weapons, aiming them at Marrow's guards. "Drop it, Tom," Marrow hissed. Riker slowly let his gun slide back into the holster. He raised his hands. Hawk did not lower his weapon. He stared into Riker's eyes, letting the man see the death that lived there. Then, slowly, he stepped back, placing himself between the gunman and Eliza. "Get out," Hawk said. Marrow adjusted his silk vest. He looked at the judge, then at Hawk, then at Eliza. His face was a mask of composed fury, but his eyes promised a violence that no court could contain. "This is not over," Marrow said softly. "The law has had its say. Now the land will have its say." He turned and walked out of the saloon, his spurs jingling. Riker and the other gunmen followed, backing out slowly, their hands hovering near their weapons. The saloon door swung shut. "You best watch your back, son," Judge Sterling said to Hawk. That man has too much pride to let a public shaming stand. I know, Hawk said. He holstered his gun and turned to Eliza. She was trembling, but she was standing upright. Let us go home, he said. They left town immediately. Hawk knew that Marrow would not attack in the street. Too many witnesses. Too many guns turned against him now. He would wait for the open road. He would wait for the dark. The sun was setting as their wagon rumbled through the canyon pass, 5 miles from the ranch. The walls of the canyon rose high and steep, casting long shadows across the trail. It was the perfect kill zone. Hawk pulled the reins, stopping the horses. Why are we stopping? Eliza asked, her hand going to the pistol in her lap. Too quiet, Hawk said. No birds. He was right. The canyon was silent. The evening crickets were mute. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked from the rim of the canyon. The dirt exploded near the front wheel of the wagon. The horses screamed and reared. Get down, Hawk shouted, shoving Eliza to the floorboards. Another shot rang out, and Hawk jerked back, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, tearing through the buckskin and drawing blood. Hawk! Eliza screamed. I am fine. Run for the rocks! They tumbled out of the wagon as a fusillade of bullets rained down from the cliffs above. Wood splintered around them. They scrambled behind a cluster of boulders at the base of the canyon wall. Hawk pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder, his face grim. He peered over the rock. They are up high. They have the advantage. How many? Eliza asked, gripping her Colt Navy with both hands. 4, maybe 5. Riker is up there. I saw his hat. A bullet pinged off the rock inches from Eliza's head, sending stone chips flying. She flinched, curling inward. The fear was trying to take her, trying to pull her back into the dark room. Eliza, Hawk's voice cut through the panic. Look at me. Remember the tin cans? Remember? She looked at him. She saw the blood seeping between his fingers. If she froze now, he would die. If she froze now, Marrow won. I remember, she said. Her voice sounded strange to her ears, cold, detached. Cover me, Hawk said. I need to move to the next rock to get a clear shot at the ridge. Fire at the flash. Hawk moved. He sprinted across the open gap. Eliza rose to her knees. She saw a puff of smoke from a jagged outcrop halfway up the cliff. She did not think. She did not hesitate. She extended her arms, aimed at the smoke, and pulled the trigger. Bang! A man screamed. A rifle clattered down the cliff face, followed by a body tumbling loosely through the brush. I got one, she shouted, shock and triumph warring in her chest. Keep firing, Hawk yelled from his new position. He raised his Winchester and fired 3 rapid shots. Another gunman on the ridge ducked back, but they were pinned. Marrow's men were moving to flank them. Riker was shouting orders from above. Burn them out, Riker yelled. Throw the dynamite. A stick of dynamite, the fuse sparking, arched through the air. It landed 20 feet from their position. Move! Hawk grabbed Eliza and dragged her deeper into a crevice just as the explosion rocked the ground. Dust and debris rained down on them. They were trapped. They were outgunned. And Marrow was closing in. Suddenly, a new sound echoed through the canyon. It was not a gunshot. It was a high, trilling cry, the war cry of the Comanche. From the opposite rim of the canyon, silhouettes appeared against the darkening sky. 10 bears and 3 other warriors stood there, their silhouettes stark and terrifying. Next to them was Billy and 2 cowboys from town. A volley of fire erupted from the top of the cliffs, but this time it was directed at Marrow's men. The hunters had become the hunted, caught in a crossfire between Hawk below and the Comanche warriors above. Marrow's hired guns panicked. 2 of them threw down their weapons and ran. Cowards! Marrow's voice screamed from the shadows. Fight, damn you! Hawk saw movement in the brush near the wagon. A figure in a black suit was trying to reach the horses. Hawk ignored the pain in his shoulder. He vaulted over the rock and charged. Marrow turned, raising a silver-plated revolver. But he was a businessman, not a warrior. He was too slow. Hawk slammed into him, knocking the gun from his hand. They went down in the dust, rolling over and over. Marrow clawed at Hawk's face, his expensive ring-tearing skin, but Hawk was fueled by a lifetime of survival. He pinned Marrow to the ground, his knife drawn and pressed against the cattle baron's throat. "Yield!" Hawk roared. Marrow froze. The cold steel was biting into his neck. He looked up and saw death in Hawk's eyes. He saw Eliza standing over them, her gun pointed at his heart. He saw the Comanche warriors descending the cliff path. The king of the feedlots went limp. "I yield," he gasped. "Don't kill me." Hawk stared at him. The bloodlust was singing in his veins. It would be so easy. One slice, and the M brand would be avenged. "Do it," Marrow whispered, seeing the hesitation. "Show them you are a savage." Hawk's hand trembled. Then he looked at Eliza. She was watching him. She was not looking away. She was holding her breath. Hawk took a deep breath. He pulled the knife away. He stood up, dragging Marrow with him by the lapels of his expensive suit. "No," Hawk said, shoving Marrow toward the approaching cowboys. "I am not the savage here." Billy rode up, rope in hand. He grinned at Hawk. "Sheriff's on his way. We figured you might need some backup." "You figured right," Hawk said, clutching his shoulder. Eliza walked up to them. She looked at Marrow, who was now dusty, bleeding, and bound. She looked at the man who had owned her nightmares. He looked small now. Just a man. She holstered her gun. She turned to Hawk and reached for his good hand. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "I will live," Hawk said. He looked at her with fierce pride. "You shot that man." "I aim for the can," she said, her voice trembling as the adrenaline faded. 10 bears rode up on a spotted pony. He looked at the bound Marrow, then at Eliza. He nodded once, a gesture of profound respect. "The woman shoots straight," the old chief said. "She is Comanche now." The sun had fully set. The canyon was bathed in the cool blue light of the moon. The battle was over. The law had spoken, and the gun had confirmed it. Hawk put his arm around Eliza, and together they watched as Marrow was hoisted onto a horse, his reign of terror ending not with a bang, but with the click of handcuffs. They were battered, they were bleeding, but they were standing, and for the first time, the dark felt like a friend. The dust from the canyon battle had barely settled when the wheels of federal justice began to turn. It was not a swift process, for the law in the territories was often as slow as a wagon train moving through mud. But this time, it carried the weight of the United States government. Clayton Marrow sat in the back of a reinforced transport wagon, his fine suit ruined by dirt and dried blood, his wrists bound in iron. He did not look like a king of cattle anymore. He looked like a man who had bet his soul on a pair of deuces and lost to a royal flush. Judge Sterling had wired for a United States Marshal the morning after the shootout. The arrival of Marshal Davis, a man with a face like carved granite and a reputation for absolute incorruptibility, signaled the end of Marrow's reign. Hawk stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, watching the preparations for departure. His shoulder was bandaged, the white linen stark against his dark skin. Beside him stood Eliza. She was not hiding. She stood with her hand resting lightly on the railing, watching the man who had owned her nightmares being treated like common cargo. "He goes to St. Louis first," Marshal Davis told them, adjusting his hat against the glare of the sun. "Then likely to a federal court in the east, kidnapping across state lines, holding a person in peonage, assault with intent to kill. The Quakers in Philadelphia have sent a pile of affidavits thick as a Bible." "You will not see him again, Mrs. Hawk." Eliza flinched slightly at the name Mrs. Hawk. It was not legal yet. Not on paper, but the marshal had used it with an easy respect that made her heart stumble. "And Riker?" Hawk asked, his voice low. "Tom Riker ran like a coyote when the shooting started." The marshal spat. "But we will find him. Men like that always end up at the end of a rope eventually. They do not know how to live any other way." One of the younger gunmen, the cowboy named Billy, who had turned on his boss in the canyon, stood nearby. He was not in chains, though he looked nervous. "I'm going with him," Billy said, twisting his hat in his hands as he looked at Eliza. "To testify." I saw what they did to you in San Antonio. Ma'am, I turned my eyes away then. I will not turn them away now." Eliza looked at the young man. He had been part of the machinery that hurt her, yet he had also been the one to bring the rope to bind Marrow. Forgiveness was a difficult door to open, but Eliza found the key was not as rusty as she thought. "Thank you, Billy," she said softly. "Speak the truth. That is all I ask." The marshal cracked his whip. The heavy wagon lurched forward. Marrow did not look back. He stared at the floorboards, defeated not by a bullet, but by the one thing he had never accounted for: the courage of a woman he deemed broken. As the caravan disappeared into the heat haze of the horizon, Eliza let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 2 years. The invisible chain that had tethered her ankle to the gilded cage snapped. It fell away, silent and unseen, into the Texas dust. In the weeks that followed, the town of Blue Mesa underwent a strange and quiet transformation. The saloon brawl and the canyon fight had stripped away the polite veneers of the townsfolk, forcing them to look at their own prejudices. They had watched a savage defend the law while a wealthy white businessman tried to murder it. It was a lesson that was hard to swallow, but impossible to ignore. The change began with small things. Eliza ventured into the mercantile alone one Tuesday morning to buy thread. The bell jingled, and the usual hush fell over the room. Agnes, the shopkeeper's wife who had once called Eliza shameless, loud enough to be heard in the next county, was behind the counter measuring flour. Eliza stiffened, preparing for the cold shoulder or the whispered insult. She moved to the fabric section, keeping her eyes down, selecting a bolt of sturdy gray wool for Hawk's winter coat. "That is too scratchy," a voice said. Eliza looked up. Agnes was standing there, her hands dusted with white flour. The older woman looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the store before settling on Eliza's face. "For a coat," Agnes continued, her voice gruff but lacking its usual venom. "That wool is too scratchy. Mr. Hawk, he will itch until he goes mad." Agnes reached under the counter and pulled out a bolt of deep, rich brown wool. It was thicker, softer, and clearly more expensive. "Take this one," Agnes said. She hesitated, then added, "I will mark it down as damaged stock, 50% off." Eliza looked at the fabric. It was flawless. She looked back at Agnes. "It looks perfect to me," Eliza said. "Well," Agnes sniffed, wiping her hands on her apron, "everyone has a few tears in the fabric. Child, does not mean it cannot keep you warm. Every woman deserves a fresh cut of cloth now and then." It was an olive branch wrapped in commerce. Eliza touched the soft wool. "Thank you, Agnes." "And tell that husband of yours," Agnes added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that if he plans to expand his herd, my husband has a surplus of fencing wire he might trade for. Well, he might trade for some of that cured venison your people make." So, your people, not savages, not heathens. By the time Eliza left the store, the name had stuck. No one called her the mail-order bride anymore. They called her Eliza Hawk. The legality of the marriage license was a technicality the town was willing to overlook in favor of the reality they saw a woman who walked with her head high beside the man who had fought an army for her. But the acceptance of the town was only half the bridge. The other half lay across the creek, among the conical lodges of the Comanche. Hawk had been wary of bringing Eliza fully into the fold of his uncle's band. He knew the elders were traditional, and many harbored a deep, justified mistrust of white people. But 10 bears had fought beside them in the canyon. Blood had been spilled together, and among the Comanche, blood was a bond stronger than milk. One evening, just as the sun was painting the sky in violent streaks of violet and gold, 10 bears rode to the ranch house. He did not come alone. He brought with him an elderly woman, her face a map of 1,000 winters, her silver hair braided with strips of red cloth. This was Runs with Wind, the matriarch of the band. "My aunt wishes to see the woman," 10 bears announced, sitting tall on his pony. Hawk looked at Eliza. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes wide. "It is an honor," Hawk whispered to her. "Do not be afraid. She sees with her spirit, not her eyes." Eliza stepped off the porch. She walked to the old woman's horse. Runs with Wind slid down with a surprising agility. She stood before Eliza, leaning on a twisted cedar staff. She was small, barely reaching Eliza's shoulder, but she radiated a power that made the air hum. The old woman reached out. Her hands were like dried leaves, papery and warm. She touched Eliza's face. Then, she touched the scar on Eliza's neck, the thin white line left by a knife. Eliza did not flinch. She stood still, letting the woman read the history written on her skin. Runs with Wind murmured something in the Comanche tongue. She looked into Eliza's eyes, nodding slowly. She turned to Hawk and spoke a rapid sentence. Hawk smiled, a rare, broad smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "What did she say?" Eliza asked. "She says you have the eyes of a wolf that has chewed off its own leg to escape the trap." Hawk translated. "She says you are not white inside. You are iron." The old woman reached into a pouch at her belt. She pulled out a small necklace made of porcupine quills and a single, smooth, red stone. She placed it around Eliza's neck. "She gives you a name," Hawk said, his voice thick with emotion. "Among our people, you earn your name. She calls you Pia Conativo." "What does it mean?" "It means one who walks through fire and stands," Hawk said. Eliza touched the cool stone at her throat. Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound sense of belonging. She had been called many things: daughter of a drunk, whore, property, fugitive. But this name was armor. "Tell her thank you," Eliza whispered. "Tell her I will try to stand tall." The old woman did not need a translation. She patted Eliza's cheek, climbed back onto her horse, and rode away into the twilight, leaving Eliza Monroe not just a survivor, but a sister to the plains. Peace settled over the ranch like a warm blanket. But trauma was not a guest that left quietly just because the door was open. There were still nights when the wind howled too loudly, and Eliza would wake up gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. In those moments, the memory of the gilded cage was so visceral she could smell the cigar smoke and feel the rough hands. But now, she was not alone in the dark. Hawk would be there instantly. He did not try to fix it with words. He did not tell her to hush. He simply became a presence. He would sit up, his back against the headboard, and pull her against his chest. He became the wall that guarded her. "I am here," he would rumble, the vibration of his voice against her back more soothing than any medicine. "The door is bolted. The gun is loaded. You are in Texas. You are with Hawk." He did not try to erase her past. He acknowledged it. He stood guard over her memories just as he stood guard over the house. And slowly, night by night, the terrors lost their teeth. With the fading of fear came the blossoming of something else, something Eliza had thought was dead forever: desire. In the beginning, their intimacy had been tentative, a careful negotiation of boundaries. But as the threat of marrow vanished, a new playfulness entered their bedroom. One night, after a long day of breaking horses, Hawk lay on the bed, groaning theatrically as he stretched his sore muscles. Eliza, fresh from washing, sat beside him, rubbing a liniment of sage and fat into his shoulder. "You are getting old, warrior," she teased, digging her thumb into a knot of muscle. Hawk laughed, grabbing her wrist. "Careful, woman! An old wolf still bites." He pulled her down onto the mattress. Eliza squealed, breathless with laughter as he pinned her, not with force, but with weight and warmth. "Do you want me to stop?" he asked, the question of a ritual they still maintained, ensuring her agency was always absolute. Eliza looked up at him. His hair fell around them like a curtain, shutting out the world. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "No," she said, a mischievous glint in her blue eyes. "I want you to work for your keep." She pulled him down for a kiss. It was not the desperate, clinging kiss of the storm night. It was slow. It was deep. It was exploring. That night, Eliza took the lead. She pushed him back against the pillows. She straddled his waist, her hands roaming over his chest, marveling at the strength beneath the skin. She discovered that she could give pleasure, not as a duty, but as a gift. She discovered that her own body was not just a vessel for pain, but an instrument of joy. When she cried out later, arching her back in the moonlight, it was a sound of triumph. She was reclaiming every inch of herself. Every touch was a declaration of victory over the men who had tried to steal her soul. As summer turned to autumn, turning the cottonwoods along the creek to brilliant gold, Eliza found a new purpose. She had been teaching the children from the Comanche camp to read and write using a slate on the porch. It started with 2 children, then 4, soon. A neighbor from a poor white homestead down the valley. A man who had barely spoken to Hawk for 5 years rode up with his 2 sons. "Heard your missus is teaching letters," the man mumbled, looking at his boots. "My boys, they don't know anything but cows. Reckon she could learn 'em to write their names." Eliza did not hesitate. "Send them on Tuesday," she said. Within a month, the front porch of the ranch had become a makeshift schoolhouse. There were Comanche children sitting next to the sons of white sharecroppers and the daughter of a Mexican vaquero. They sat on rough benches Hawk had built, learning their ABCs under the watchful eye of the woman with the scar on her neck. Hawk watched from the barn, leaning on his pitchfork. He saw the way the children looked at Eliza not as a victim, but as a source of light. "You are making trouble," Hawk teased her one evening as they sat watching the sunset. "Educating the masses. They will start demanding wages soon." "Good," Eliza said, sipping her coffee. "Ignorance is what makes men mean. Hawk, if these boys learn to read, maybe they will learn to think. And if they think, maybe they won't grow up to be like Marrow." "You are building a new world on my porch," Hawk said affectionately. "I am just using the space." She replied, "But Hawk, we need more books and slate pencils." "I will sell 2 steers," he promised. "You shall have your books." Then came the letter from the east. It arrived in late November, carried by the same postmaster who now tipped his hat to Eliza when he rode by. It was from the Quaker lawyer in Philadelphia. Eliza sat by the fire to read it, her hands shaking slightly. Hawk stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. "Dear Mrs. Hawk, I write to inform you of the conclusion of the federal inquiry, based on your testimony and the corroboration of the witness William Billy Stanton. The Department of Justice has moved against the syndicate operating in San Antonio. The Gilded Cage has been closed. The building has been seized. Clayton Marrow has been sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. He will die in a cage, just as he forced others to live in one. But there is more news. We were able to locate 6 other women who were being held under similar false contracts. They have been returned to their families. When I told them of the woman named Rose, who escaped and sent the law back for them, they wept. They tell stories of you. Eliza, you are a legend in the dark places. You gave them hope when they had none. Walk in the light, friend. Obadiah Smith, ESQ. Eliza lowered the letter. She stared into the flames of the hearth. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast. Eliza Hawk knelt beside her. "Is it bad news?" "No," she choked out, laughing through her tears. "It is the best news. They are free. Hawk, the girls, they are free." She handed him the letter. Hawk read it slowly. He read the part about Marrow dying in a cage. He read the part about Rose being a legend. He looked at his wife. She was no longer the terrified girl who had stepped off the stagecoach. She was a force of nature. She had taken her pain and forged it into a key that unlocked the chains of strangers 1,000 miles away. "Rose is truly dead," Hawk said quietly. "But she died fighting." Eliza wiped her face. "I can sleep now," she whispered. "I can really sleep." Later that evening, Hawk rode into town to speak with Reverend Thomas about ordering the books for Eliza's school. The 2 men stood in the small churchyard, the winter stars bright above them. "She is a remarkable woman, Nathan," the Reverend said, using Hawk's English name. "You saved her life." Hawk looked toward the dark outline of the hills. He thought of the empty years before Eliza came. He thought of the silence of the ranch house. He thought of the bitterness he had carried in his heart against the white world that had rejected him and the Comanche world that was fading. "No, Reverend," Hawk said, his voice rough with honesty. "I gave her a roof, that is all." He turned to look the holy man in the eye. "I was a ghost in my own house." Hawk confessed. "I was waiting to die, or to be killed. I had land, but I had no reason. When she came, she was broken. But in fixing the cracks in her, I found the pieces of myself." He took a deep breath of the cold night air. "I did not save her," Hawk said. "She saved me. She gave me a war worth fighting. She gave me a future that is not just about surviving the winter. She gave me a life." The Reverend smiled, patting the young warrior on the arm. "Then go home to it, son. Go home." Hawk rode back under the vast canopy of the Texas sky. The wind was biting, but he did not feel the cold. He saw the light of the ranch house in the distance, a single, steady beacon in the darkness. It was not a fortress anymore. It was a home. And inside, waiting for him, was the one who walks through fire. 1 year later, the spring arrived on the plains not with a whisper, but with a riot of life. The harsh browns and grays of the Texas winter had surrendered to an explosion of emerald green. The bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush blanketed the hillsides, painting the earth in strokes of indigo and fire. The creek, swollen with snowmelt from the distant mountains, sang a clear, rushing song as it cut through the limestone. The Hawk Ranch was no longer a silent fortress of solitude. As the sun climbed high into the morning sky, the air was filled with sounds that had once been strangers to this valley. There was the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of hammers repairing a fence, accompanied by the whistling of hired handsmen who, a year ago, would have spat at the idea of working for a Comanche, but who now tipped their hats to the boss who paid fair wages in silver. There was the whinnying of foals, long-legged and clumsy, chasing each other through the paddock, and, sweetest of all, there was the sound of children's laughter drifting from the wide, shaded porch of the main house. Hawk stood on the high ridge overlooking his land. He was no longer the solitary figure wrapped in a blanket against the cold wind of isolation. He wore a clean linen shirt and a vest of soft leather, his hair tied back neatly. He looked down at the valley, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners. Beside him stood Eliza. She had changed too. The haunted, hollow-cheeked girl who had stepped off the stagecoach with fear in her marrow was gone. In her place stood a woman who radiated a quiet, unshakable strength. Her skin was kissed by the sun, glowing with health. She wore a dress of simple blue cotton, but it was cut to accommodate the new shape of her body. Eliza was heavy with children. She rested one hand on the swell of her belly, feeling the distinct, vigorous kick of new life. She smiled, looking out over the green expanse. "He is restless today," she said, her voice warm and steady. Hawk turned to her. He reached out and placed his large, calloused hand over hers on her stomach. He waited, holding his breath, until he felt it too a strong push against his palm. Tears pricked his eyes, sudden and overwhelming. He blinked them away, looking at his wife with a wonder that never seemed to fade. "A warrior," Hawk murmured. "Strong legs. Or a dancer," Eliza teased gently. "Or a teacher. We will let them choose." "Yes," Hawk agreed. "They will choose." He looked at his hand covering their child. For so long, he had believed his bloodline was cursed, destined to end in dust and violence. He had thought himself the last member of a dying fire. He never imagined he would be the spark of a new one, burning bright and clean in a time of peace. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I am," Eliza said. They walked down the hill together, Hawk matching his long strides to her slower pace. They walked not as master and servant, not as savior and victim, but as equals, their shadows merging into one on the grass. When they reached the yard, a crowd had gathered. It was a strange, beautiful assembly that would have been impossible anywhere else in the territory. Judge Sterling had returned, his white hair gleaming in the sun. He stood with his Bible, looking solemn but pleased. Beside him stood Reverend Thomas, and in a wide semicircle around them stood the members of Ten Bears' band, dressed in their finest buckskins and beaded regalia, standing shoulder to shoulder with the cowboys and townsfolk of Blue Mesa. Agnes from the Mercantile was there, holding a quilt she had stitched herself. Billy the cowboy stood next to a young Comanche warrior, both of them admiring a new colt. It was a wedding, a true wedding. The first ceremony had been a paper transaction, a mail-order arrangement born of necessity. This one was born of triumph. They stood before Judge Sterling under the shade of the great oak tree. "Do you, Nathan Hawk, take this woman?" the judge asked. "I do," Hawk said, his voice ringing clear. "Do you, Eliza Monroe, take this man?" "I do," Eliza said, looking directly into Hawk's eyes. The judge signed the paper. It was a legal document, recognized by the laws of the United States. It gave them rights. It gave their children a name that could not be erased by prejudice. But the ceremony was not over. As the judge closed his book, 10 bears stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. The old chief held a burning bundle of sage, wafting the smoke over the couple with an eagle feather. He spoke in the flowing, rhythmic tongue of the people. "Today," 10 bears translated for the gathered crowd, his voice raspy with age, "we do not join two strangers. We join two halves of the same soul." He took a strip of red cloth and tied Hawk's wrist to Eliza's. "There is no white man here," 10 bears declared. "There is no Comanche here. There is only family. The blood is one. The heart is one. What the earth has joined. Let no man's law divide." He looked at Eliza's belly and smiled. "And the seed is planted in good soil." The drum began to beat a slow, steady rhythm like the heartbeat of the plains. The Comanche women began to sing a song of blessing, and to the amazement of everyone, Agnes and the other town ladies began to clap along, awkward at first, then with genuine joy. Later that afternoon, as the feast was being served, roasted venison alongside apple pies, Eliza slipped away to the small desk in the corner of the main room. She pulled out a sheet of fine paper and dipped her pen in ink. She had one more task to complete. To the Society of Friends, Philadelphia. I write this not to ask for help, but to offer it. My journey began in darkness. A mail-order bride sold like cattle to a land I feared. I thought I was going to prison. Instead, I found a house. I want you to tell the women you help the ones who are bruised, the ones who are afraid, the ones who think their lives are over, that there is hope. Tell them that even in the wildest places, there are men who are gentle. Tell them that a scar is not a stain. It is a map of where you have been, not a decree of who you are. I have learned that you are not your wound. You can be the hand that heals. If any woman needs a safe harbor, send her to Blue Mesa. The door at the Hawk Ranch is never locked to those who run from the dark. Yours in freedom, Eliza Hawk. She sealed the letter. It was her beacon, a light she was sending back into the fog to guide others home. Outside, Hawk was surrounded by children. The students of Eliza's Port School, a mix of white, Mexican, and Comanche faces, were sitting on the fence rails, watching him with wide eyes. "Is it true you fought a bear?" a little boy named Toby asked. "A mountain lion," Hawk corrected, smiling. "But the bear makes a better story." "Teach us to be warriors," another boy shouted. Hawk's face grew serious. He looked at the boys, then at the girls who were watching too. "Being a warrior is not about fighting," Hawk said gently. "Any fool can pick up a gun. A gun is easy. Killing is easy." He pointed to the unbroken horse in the corral. "Real strength," Hawk said, "is control. It is having the power to hurt, but choosing to help. It is standing between the wolf and the lamb, not becoming the wolf." He looked at the mixed group of children, the future of this hard, bloody land. "You have a choice," Hawk told them. "People will tell you that you must be this or that you must hate the Indian or hate the white man. That is a lie. You choose who you are. You can be free inside your own head, no matter what chains they try to put on you." Eliza stepped out onto the porch. She watched him teaching them, her heart swelling so full she thought it might burst. This man, who had once thought he had nothing to offer but violence, was planting seeds of peace in the next generation. Hawk looked up and saw her. He excused himself from the children and walked to her. "The letter is done," he asked. "It is done," she said. "It goes tomorrow." "Come," Hawk said. "Walk with me." They walked away from the noise of the party, up the gentle slope to the high ridge where they had stood earlier. The sun was beginning to set, setting the western sky on fire with glorious bands of orange, purple, and gold. The wind blew through the tall grass, whispering the secrets of the earth. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the light fade. Hawk looked at Eliza. He remembered the day she had arrived, the pale, terrified creature in the blue dress, flinching at her own shadow. He remembered the scars on her legs, the brand on her thigh, the way she had shaken when she held the gun. "I remember the first day," Hawk said softly. "I saw the marks on you. I thought I had to be a wall for you. I thought I had to hide you." "You did," Eliza said. "You gave me a sanctuary." "No." Hawk shook his head. "I learned something. Eliza, I watched you. I watched you shoot. I watched you stand in front of Merrow in the street. I watched you teach those children." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. His eyes were fierce with admiration. "I thought I was teaching you to survive," Hawk said. "But you taught me how to live. You showed me that strength is not just about endurance. It is about refusing to let the pain turn you into stone. I thought my only power was my knife. You showed me the power of building." Eliza reached up and touched his face. "That day, in the wagon," she whispered. "I thought you were saving me from them, from the men who hurt me, and you did." She looked deep into his dark eyes. "But now I know," she continued, her voice trembling with love. "You saved me from the idea that I was just a thing. You saved me from believing I was only good for being used. You looked at my scars, and you did not see ugly. You saw me." "And you," Hawk replied, his voice thick. "You saved me from the belief that a warrior only has value when he is bleeding. You taught me that protecting someone is sometimes teaching them to shoot, and sometimes it is learning how to touch them without hurting." He placed his hand over her heart. "You are the fire that keeps me warm. Piacona ti vo." Eliza smiled, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "And you are the rock I stand on. Now, Keta." They stood together as the first star appeared in the twilight sky. "We must name the child," Eliza said. "If it is a boy," Hawk asked. "We will see," she said. "But if it is a girl—" "If it is a girl," Hawk finished for her. "She will have 2 names, one for the world and one for the spirit." "Hope," Eliza said. "Her name will be Hope." "Hope," Hawk tested the word. "It is a good English name, and in Comanche, we will call her Taba Uni." "What does it mean?" "It means the dawn after the storm." Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. "Hope Taba Uni, Hawk. It is perfect." Below them, the ranch was glowing with lantern light. The sound of the fiddle had started, a lively tune that drifted up on the breeze, the laughter of the children, the chatter of the guests, the lowing of the cattle, it all blended into a symphony of peace. The Wild West was still out there. There were still outlaws, still unjust laws, still long, hard winters. But here, on this patch of earth where a Comanche warrior loved a scarred mail-order bride, freedom had found a home. The wind blew across the grass, bending the stalks but not breaking them. They stood together, silhouetted against the vast, endless sky. 2 survivors who had found the only victory that mattered. They had found each other. Thank you so much for listening to this story. The young Comanche saw the wounds she hid. It has been a journey of healing, courage, and the power of love to rewrite the darkest pasts. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. Are you on a porch in Texas, a city apartment in London, or somewhere in between? Let's share our stories. If this tale touched your heart, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like the video to help us grow. And if you really enjoyed it, Hit that hype button so this story can reach more listeners around the world. Until the next campfire, ride safe and keep your heart open.